Kari, thank you so much again for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. It's been a little while.
It has been a minute. How do you find your life in Washington? How is that going?
Well, I'm not a creature of Washington, D.C., but I'm happy to be here. I'm really fighting hard for the American taxpayer, and I'm honored to be part of the President Trump administration to put America first, and that's exactly what we're doing. So while I miss Arizona and I miss just the wonderful people of Arizona, I know that what I'm doing here will have an impact on not only the people of Arizona's lives, but all the people in all 50 states. And so we're working hard. I'm happy to be part of it. And it's been exciting. It's been a little rough and tumble because we're being met with massive resistance. You would think that everybody in America, Democrat, Republican, whatever your political affiliation is, would want to make sure an agency is run with full transparency, that no tax dollars are being wasted. You would think that if you were told and if you found out that there were spies being funneled into an agency, you'd want that to stop. And you would think that if you found out that a media agency that was designed to put out America's story to international audiences was actually, in many occasions, putting out an anti-American story or news that was hurtful and harmful to American interests, that everybody would say, we got to fix that. But unfortunately, that's not how DC is. And there's a lot of people in different political affiliations who are okay with that kind of an agency. I'm not, President Trump is not, and we are going to fix this and turn it around. So we're working really hard.
It does seem so odd. It seems so odd when people want to support things that are sort of uncannily destructive and or expensive. I feel like this administration has got momentum and states are beginning to follow suit. Even California is talking about streamlining and reducing red tape. The whole sort of Doge phenomenon has kind of caught on. But isn't it odd when people still resist wasting money in Washington, or is that just how they feel they're privileged?
I think if you've been involved in politics, which I somehow found my way into few years ago when I quit my job in the media and ended up being recruited by the people of Arizona to jump into politics, you realize that these politicians actually create the problems that we all complain about. They create the problems. They want problems so that they can then pour taxpayer money into it and say they're trying to solve the problem, when in fact, solving these problems is a lot easier than they let on to. And so I'm not surprised by it. I'm saddened, though, that we have this opportunity with a transformative president like President Trump to actually turn things around and get our country back on track, and that there's so much resistance from the courts, where we've got judges wearing black robes who are really they're really politicians, or, in the case of many of our court cases that have been launched against us, these judges want to run an agency. And I kind of joke around a little bit and say, if you really want to work in an executive branch agency, you need to go to usajobs.gov and apply. But right now you're a judge and you need to follow the Constitution, and we're just not getting that. There's so much waste in DC. We saw it with USAID, just shocking amounts of waste. We're seeing the same thing at my agency. $850,000 of your tax dollars, the hardworking men and women out there who are watching, going to fund a New York City a concert in New York City. $100,000 to fund a Afghan cricket team. $70,000 to do a study on whether Mac computers can help with social distancing during COVID. I can go on and on. We find out that people who are in charge of doing the contracts at our agency are actually giving contracts to family members, which is illegal. And then, to me, the most shocking stuff, there's several things. We're finding out that there's a history of hiring known spies or people who are from foreign countries that are known enemies of America, and we're bringing people in without doing proper background checks. There are times that they've hired spies, Russian propagandists who've come in to push anti-American propaganda. And shockingly, at this agency that puts out media across the globe about America, nobody in the agency, including myself, I don't have any power over the content being pushed out. So if they choose to put anti-American, pro-CCP content, I can't pick up the phone and call the newsroom and say, stop doing that, because they have put in an editorial firewall to really Trump-proof the agency. It's a rogue agency. This is why President Trump wants to eliminate it, and I'm working to do that.
Is that the plan? Just get rid of it? I'd rather my tax dollars be saved. There must be better ways, especially in today's world. Radio, who cares? You know, let's put some other ways of putting out American interest through the internet.
You made a great point. I mean, they've been resistant to modernizing. They're still doing 1990s style TV and radio. I mean, thank God, Dr. Drew, that the federal government never started up a typewriter factory 84 years ago when this agency was lined up. Because if they did, I would assure you that that typewriter factory would still be operational in D.C. They'd be calling to expand it and pour more money into it. They never want to modernize. They never want to shrink things down. They never want to say, mission accomplished. We don't need the money to be spent here anymore. That's just not how it operates. President Trump put out an executive order calling for this agency to be shrunk down to its statutory minimum, and that's what we're doing. I've eliminated 85% of the workforce. We are in the process of scaling it down to only covering the languages that are required by law. And then next fiscal year, starting in October, President Trump wants us to eliminate the agency, so I'm working to effectuate that as well. You're right, our tax dollars could be spent more wisely elsewhere, and especially since this agency is not in alignment with our long-term interests and our national policy.
I want to share with our viewers a clip. You're going to set it up for me. Speaking to Representative Stanton, I think, and you'd mentioned how you had transitioned out of your career in media into politics, and you know I'm a fan, particularly of how your poise and clarity and management of these people who either are in the media or want to commandeer the media. And this was a great example of sort of classic Kari Lake. Can you set that up for us?
You came in late, and
here it is.
You want to hear it first?
Wait, let's let Kari set it up. Go ahead. Let's let Kari set it up first.
Yeah. Well, so I went and spoke before a hearing last week at the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It was called Spies, Lies, and Mismanagement, talking about how this agency's been infested with spies over the years, how they've lied to the public with the content they're putting out. The CCP has more say over the content that goes out on VOA than someone such as myself, and how they've mismanaged our funds.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Say that again, because that's an extraordinary statement. How is that possible?
Well, we do a language service called Mandarin language. We do a Mandarin language, and several times a year, the people who worked in Mandarin, the managers there, would go to the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., and CCP officials would tell them how they should be covering China. Can you imagine that? And they would go to China and do visits there and let CCP officials tell them how they should be covering the CCP and China. It's absolutely obscene that was happening, and it should be illegal. It might be illegal. So I'm setting this up and laying all this out. And we had some really good questions. I must say the majority of the questions that were meaningful came from the Republicans. I think this should be a bipartisan issue. The Democrats were attacking me, and Greg Stanton, who used to be the mayor of Phoenix, not a very effective mayor, who's now a congressman, chose to spend 5 minutes trying to berate me for having the courage to fight for election integrity. And I just happened to use an example that I thought he could relate to about how we need to have control over some of the messaging going out over this billion-dollar agency across the globe as it pertains to America, so that lies aren't being told. And now you can go ahead and play that clip.
But you weren't here, you came in late, and we're talking about USAGM today, the Agency for Global Media, and how they can put out absolute abject lies, and we can't control we have no say over what the editorial content is, and I would hope that you would not be okay with that. They could literally put out a lie about anybody here. And I know you've been the victim of that. I remember the stories about you where they said you had a gay lover, and those were going
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman.
Lies are being told on Voice of America. It's inappropriate. You've been subjected to lies that you said were lies about you in the media before. And how would you like it if those lies were put on Voice of America right now?
Sorry about Caleb's editorial excesses, but he couldn't resist himself. But I actually, I know people are listening carefully. I listen very carefully when you talk, and you set that up so beautifully. You got him on two fronts. I know you came in late, Congressman. And secondly, of course, you wouldn't want any lies to be spread about you. Oh, wait a minute. There was one. I thought it was
I
brilliant.
thought he could relate to that. You know, he sat for 5 minutes. He didn't ask a question about how we can make sure that we don't have national security risk situation, how we can make sure we're watching over, being stewards of the tax money that is being spent there, or any other issue. And I thought, well, maybe he can relate to that. He spent 5 minutes berating me, lying about me, telling people that I'm a liar. It was just absolutely horrible. He was completely off topic. He didn't care about the issue and why we were there. And I thought, you know what, maybe if I give him something he can relate to, then he will understand better. And, those were the stories that were going around, that he was, having extracurricular activities behind his family's back. And those were going around. Now, he said they were lies. I just thought he could relate to that, because those kind of so-called lies could get put out there again today on an outlet like VOA. And he couldn't even pick up the phone and say, stop doing that. They're lies. Because we have what they call an editorial firewall that prevents anybody in the government from stopping them. It's insane.
Well, it is insane. And we appreciate your service, and we appreciate your diligence. And I wish you the success in bringing this thing to its knees, because it's time. There's so much, and it's just one of so many things that need to be undone in Washington. Truly. I'm just glad you're stewarding this one.
Can I say one more thing really quickly? I did find out in the last about a month and a half that at VOA, there is a crime investigation going on. They're investigating 2 years of threatening phone calls that have been launched against a sitting member of Congress, threatening phone calls over a 2-year span. And they found out they originated at Voice of America. I mean, this shows you the bias there. And they were launched toward a beloved Republican member of Congress, and they were originating from inside the Voice of America. Can you even imagine? Taxpayers are paying for this. Taxpayers are paying for the people who work there, and somebody in that building spent 2 years making threatening phone calls to a sitting member of Congress. I think that's a big story. The mainstream media won't cover it because it was a congressman who happens to be Republican who was on the receiving end of that, and they really appeared to not care about that kind of thing if it was a Republican.
My mind would have been blown by that 3 or 4 years ago, but so many aspects of the COVID experience opened up the door to me understanding the hubris and the extraordinary aggression of the bureaucratic entrenchment and the bureaucratic elements, that they really do believe they're in charge or should be in charge, and are sort of hubristically able to do as they want to do whenever they want to do it, kind of thing. And it would be mind-boggling were there not so much evidence of this all over the place. And so best of luck, Kari. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's what they meant by it's a threat to our democracy. They really meant it's a threat to the bureaucracy, and they're trying to protect the bureaucracy. We are trying to protect America. And so I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Dr. Drew.
You bet, Kari. That is exactly the way I feel about this. The bureaucracy is the enemy, and democracy is the solution. Freedom, fresh air, exposing people to the truth. That's what's is needed right now. Thank you, Kari. Hopefully we'll be in touch one day soon. KariLake.com, the senior advisor for U.S. Agency for Global Media. Kari Lake. Thank you.